The letter said congratulations, and I already knew something was wrong. The Galactic Accord does not waste words in its official correspondence. It is precise, economical, and almost surgical in the way it delivers information. When a routine field posting opens with congratulations, it is not a celebration. It is a polite warning that what follows will ask something of you that your ordinary working life has not prepared you for. The assignment looked simple on paper. 72 hours. Field observation. A human conflict zone in Sector 7 Delta. Standard interspecies monitoring under Accord Protocol 7.7.14c, subsection Humanity, active engagement. My role was to observe the proceedings, document what I witnessed, and file a clean, accurate report within 48 hours of returning. My species, the Velhari, resolved our last armed conflict 8,000 years ago. We have not fought a war since. We settled every territorial dispute, every resource tension, every ideological fracture through arbitration, negotiation, and the careful application of bureaucratic process. We are proud of this. Our educational curriculum treats it as the defining achievement of our civilization. The great leap forward. The moment we became something better. I believe that. I still believe it. I would just like to add some significant footnotes to it now. I packed my data tablets, my field manual, 2 sets of calibration lenses, 6 doses of Velhari Nervecom, and the briefing packet. 4,200 pages on human military behavior, conflict history, physiological stress responses, unit cohesion structures, and something the packet called cultural pre-combat ritual practice. I read the executive summary on the transport ship. 3 pages. Clear, informative, professionally assembled. On page 3, I found a footnote. The footnote directed me to a subappendix. The subappendix had a title that I read in full and then immediately wished I had not: Known Human Behavioral Anomalies Under Combat Conditions. See also, Why Previous Observers Required Extended Psychological Support Upon Return. I closed the subappendix. I want to be transparent about that decision. I made it intentionally. The document was open. My data stylus was in my hand. I read the title, processed it, and chose to proceed without reading further, on the basis that whatever was in there, I would manage it professionally in the field. I will think about that decision for a very long time. The transport docked at the human staging base approximately 2 hours before local dawn. The air on that planet carried a quality I had not encountered before, something between iron and burned stone, the kind of smell that sits at the back of the throat and stays there. I stepped off the ramp with my tablet already running, my lenses calibrated for low-light field conditions, and my posture at its most correct. Velhari stand very straight when we are not frightened. The straighter the posture, the more emphatically we are not frightened. I was standing like a structural support beam. The sergeant assigned to escort me through the base was a human female named Mara. She was compact and deliberate in the way she moved, with close-cropped hair and eyes that carried the specific quality I would later learn to recognize in almost every human at that base, the look of someone who has seen things that do not leave the memory clean. She looked at me for approximately 3 seconds. The kind of 3 seconds that is actually a complete assessment delivered at speed. "First deployment," she said. "No," I said. She smiled. A genuinely warm smile. With something under the warmth. Something she had decided not to say, and whatever that unsaid thing was, she found it privately funny. "Easy assignment," she said. 3 days. "You'll be fine." She turned and walked, and I followed her into the base. Nothing in 4,200 pages had prepared me for the sound of the place. Not the mechanical sounds, the equipment, the vehicles, the ambient operational noise that any large structure generates. The human sounds. Voices layered over each other in the dark before local dawn, building and crossing like badly tuned channels. Laughter from somewhere in a far building. And from a direction I could not immediately identify, someone singing. Not performing, not rehearsing. Just singing. Low and unhurried, a melody that moved through a dialect my translation module flagged as regionally specific and largely untranslatable. It stopped. Started again, quieter. Mara showed me to my assigned quarters. A small room with a window facing east toward the ridge. She set my supply pack on the desk and told me the briefing was at 0500, and that humans respect 2 things, punctuality, and people who can keep up. I told her I could keep up. She looked at me for a moment with the same evaluating quality she had used at the ramp. "Sure," she said. "We'll see." She left. I set up my equipment. Opened the field observation log. Typed the date and coordinates and held my stylus over the screen for a while after that, not sure what to add. 4,000 pages of data sat in my tablet. Numbers, ratios, behavioral classifications, historical engagement statistics. They all felt like they were describing something else right now. Something I had not arrived at yet. I was reaching for the NerveCom supplements in the bottom of my pack when my hand found something I had not put there. Paper. Folded twice. Physical paper, handwritten. Someone had placed it at the bottom of my pack before I boarded the transport. My transit coordinator. My department head. A colleague. Someone anonymous who had decided that whatever they knew, I should also know, and had chosen paper because paper cannot be logged or filed or flagged by the administrative tracking system. I unfolded it. It was from my predecessor. The previous Velhari observer assigned to human military conflict zones. I knew his file. He had submitted his final observation report 12 years ago. 3 weeks after that, he had resigned from the diplomatic corps entirely. He was currently listed in the Velhari administrative system as a voluntary logistics attaché for a human expeditionary unit. His career path had been logged under the category, unexplained voluntary reclassification. The note had 2 lines. Do not let them know you are frightened. They can sense it. Also, do not, under any circumstances, tell them this is your first deployment. That was all. No context. No additional guidance. No reassurance that I would return without needing the extended psychological support mentioned in the subappendix title. I folded the note and set it on the desk beside my tablet. Then I opened the subappendix. Not all of it. Just the first page. One page could not do serious damage to my professional equilibrium. The first page contained a single line from a xenopsychology researcher who had spent 4 years embedded with human military units and had published exactly 1 academic paper before requesting a transfer to agricultural observation on a quiet moon. The line read, "The most unsettling aspect of observing humans in combat is not the violence. It is discovering that they made their peace with it long ago, so fully and so completely, that they no longer recall making the decision. They simply live inside the answer." I closed the document. I did not sleep. At 0500 I walked into the briefing room with my data tablet, my lenses, and posture that could have held up a ceiling. Mara was already there. Approximately 40 humans filled the space in various states of readiness, checking equipment, exchanging low words, drinking from a shared container of the heated brown liquid the packet had described as coffee, which I had been warned about by 3 separate footnotes and which I tried anyway the moment I spotted the container on the side table. The footnotes were not exaggerating. It tasted like being awake on purpose. Like a decision made in liquid form. I had a second cup. Nobody said anything. A human male named Cole stood at the front of the room and spoke for 11 minutes. He was compact and deliberate, and his voice had the quality of something that does not need to be raised because it carries weight without volume. He covered tactical objectives, coordination points, communication protocols, and contingencies. He spoke the way a structural engineer describes load calculations. No drama. No declarations. No ceremony. He finished. They stood up and started moving. That moment. Not the briefing. Not the equipment. That single, quiet moment when 40 people received a plan that might be the last plan they would ever hear, and they received it the way my colleagues receive a departmental memo. Ready. Businesslike. Already decided. I typed in my observation log, human pre-engagement behavioral pattern, functional. Morale, stable and high. I sat with the tablet in my hands. Then I typed one more line, which I would remove from the official report before submission. They are not afraid. I don't know what to do with that. The briefing broke up fast. Nobody lingered. Cole moved through the room giving brief individual instructions with the efficiency of someone who has run through this particular sequence many times and has learned that every extra word is a word that takes time someone might need. Mara materialized beside me and said my observation position had been cleared on the eastern ridge, elevated, protected, with direct line of sight to the primary engagement zone. She said it with the specific neutral tone of someone informing you of facts without opinion. I had 6 hours before anything required me to be on the ridge. 6 hours in a base full of humans preparing for something I could technically classify as pre-combat preparation, but that felt, standing inside it, like something the classification system had not been built to hold. I documented what I could. Human soldiers check their equipment not once but repeatedly, and not because they distrust the previous check. They check it the way a Velhari scholar handles a first edition manuscript, with a quality of focused attention that is almost tender. I filed this under object bonding behavior, functional relevance. Then I reconsidered the word tender and deleted it. Then I put it back, because it was the accurate word and I was supposed to be accurate. I noted that humans write before going into something dangerous. Physical letters, on paper. I observed 3 individuals at different points in the compound sitting apart from the others, writing with concentrated care. One of them, a young male I was tracking in my notes as Subject 7, folded his letter into a sealed envelope and handed it to a base coordinator with instructions that, based on the body language exchange, I interpreted as, "Give this to someone if I don't come back." I did not approach him at that point. I noted that humans laugh in the hours before something terrible. Not nervous laughter, not the performative kind that people use when they are managing fear in public. Laughter that comes from the chest, from somewhere genuine. A female soldier named Lena was at the center of it. She had a quality that drew people toward her the way fire draws people in cold weather, and she told a story about a previous deployment that ended with a punchline I did not fully follow but that made the 6 people around her nearly double over. A male soldier named Pete added something that extended the punchline. Lena shoved his shoulder. They were still laughing when Cole walked past and gave them a look that contained absolutely no actual disapproval. I typed, "Pre-combat levity observed. Function, unit cohesion mechanism, possible stress regulation." I looked at that sentence for a while. It was accurate. It was also about as adequate as describing sunlight as a form of electromagnetic radiation while you are sitting in a field watching it move across the grass. The thing I could not file accurately was how the laughter sounded next to the letters. How both of those things were real and present at the same time and somehow neither one erased the other. These were people who had just written letters that they hoped no one would need to read, and now they were laughing until their eyes watered about something Pete had said. The 2 facts sat beside each other without conflict. I had no category for a mind that could hold both of those things simultaneously without one of them winning. At approximately 0900 I crossed the compound to refill my coffee. I had discovered I needed regular maintenance doses to maintain observation clarity, which I would not be mentioning in my official report, and I nearly walked directly into Subject 7. He was sitting on the ground outside the supply building with his back against the wall and his knees up, not reading anything, not doing anything. Just being still. Humans are not, as a species, built for stillness, and when they go very still like that it means something is happening inside that they are not putting anywhere visible. He looked up when I stopped. "Sorry," I said. "You're the observer," he said. "From the Accord." "Yes." "Sit down if you want," he said. I sat, because refusing felt like the wrong response and because my field manual specifically noted that voluntary human social contact during pre-engagement periods should be treated as a data opportunity. His name was Owen. He had the kind of face that would be easy to underestimate from a distance and very hard to underestimate up close. He reached into the front pocket of his jacket and took out a photograph, holding it the way you hold something you have held so many times that the action itself is a habit of the hands. The photograph showed a child. 4 years old, possibly younger. Caught mid-laugh at something the camera could not see. "My daughter," Owen said. "She has her mother's laugh. I can't quite hear it right in my head anymore. Like when you try to remember a specific sound and what you get is your memory of the sound instead of the actual thing." I did not have a response for that. I found I was looking at the photograph rather than at him. "How old is she?" I said. 4, he said. "She'll be 5 in 3 months. He put the photograph back. We sat for a moment in the kind of quiet that carries significant weight. "This is your first one," Owen said. It was not a question. "No," I said. He nodded slowly in the way people nod when they are choosing not to argue with something they know is not true. Sure, he said. Well. For what it's worth, the observation position Mara picked is a good one. Solid cover. You'll see everything without being in the middle of it. That is the protocol, I said. Yeah, he said. He was quiet for a moment. The protocol is a good idea. The middle of it is not something you want to be in. He said it simply. Not as a warning, not as a performance of toughness. Just as information. A fact he happened to know and was passing along in case it was useful. I thanked him. I walked back toward the observation prep station and typed into my log for the next 20 minutes, filling in notes about human pre-combat behavioral clustering, social bonding reinforcement patterns, the function of interpersonal contact in stress management contexts. I deleted every mention of the photograph. I am not entirely sure why I deleted it. It was relevant data. A primary emotional anchor object, a physical representation of a named personal motivation. It was exactly the kind of detail that should appear in an interspecies behavioral analysis. I deleted it because filing it felt like putting something private in a drawer that was not mine. At midday the base had a different quality. Quieter but not calmer. The kind of quiet that comes when a group of people have stopped doing the things that fill time and have shifted into a mode that is simply waiting. Lena sat cross-legged on a supply crate and did nothing at all for 20 minutes. Pete disassembled and reassembled the same piece of equipment 3 times in a row. Cole stood at the western edge of the compound for a long time, looking at the ridge without moving. The singing started again in the late afternoon. From the same building as the night before. I finally traced it to a common area with long benches and a wide table. A male soldier I had not catalogued yet was playing an instrument I did not have a precise classification for, something with strings that made a sound like a question being held open without expectation of an answer. Several people sat around him and said nothing. Some had their eyes closed. Mara found me standing outside listening and said, "You should get to your position by 1900. Engagement window opens at 2100. What is that instrument?" I said. She listened for a moment. "Acoustic guitar," she said. "Old one. Finn's had it since before I knew him." "What is he playing?" She was quiet for a moment, listening. "Something he made up," she said. "He does that before." "It's just something he does." She walked away. I stood there for another few minutes. Then I went to get into position. The ridge was cold and the wind came in from the northeast and my calibration lenses adjusted the dark landscape into clean, precise images that my tablet could record and timestamp and append to the official log. I sat in the observation shelter, tablet running, lenses steady, NerveCom supplement in my pocket that I had not yet opened. Below me, 40 humans prepared to walk into something that 4,000 pages described in statistical language that bore no relationship to the feeling of sitting on a cold ridge above people you had spoken to that morning. Owen was somewhere in that column. Finn's guitar was still in my ears. I typed, "Observer in position. 1903 hours. Conditions clear. Engagement window, 2 hours." I sat with my hands in my lap and looked at what I had typed. Then I typed, "I am aware this report will be insufficient. I am filing it anyway." It started before 2100 local time. Not the battle itself, the sound that comes before it. A quality of absence that is not quiet. The negative space of sound, where you can hear everything that is not happening yet and somehow that is louder than anything that is. My data tablet was running. My lenses were calibrated. I had my hand on the NerveCom supplement in my pocket and I had not opened it yet because opening it would be admitting something I was not ready to admit. Then it started. I will not detail the mechanical specifics in this account. Those are in the official report, time-stamped, catalogued, filed under the appropriate protocol sections. What I will say is that nothing I had read, not the 4,000 pages, not the subappendix, not my predecessor's note, had communicated the sound of it. The full, comprehensive, physical sound of human conflict. It is not what fiction and historical recordings suggest. It is not dramatic in the way that word implies. It is enormous and continuous and it fills every available space, and my calibrated lenses watched it all in clean precise resolution, and I sat there with my hand on the NerveCom supplement and I still had not opened it because I could not quite get my hands to do what I was telling them. I watched Cole lead the forward unit up the left slope in a movement that the tactical briefing had described as a flanking approach and that looked, from the ridge, like something that required the complete suspension of the survival instinct. They moved not in spite of what was happening ahead of them but through it. Directly and deliberately through it. I watched Lena coordinate a secondary unit across an open stretch that my pre-engagement reconnaissance data had flagged as a high-exposure corridor. She moved through it. The people behind her moved through it. They moved with the kind of controlled efficiency that is either the product of extraordinary training or extraordinary belief, and I was beginning to understand that for humans, those two things might be the same. I typed into my field log, Unit Alpha executing flanking approach per briefing specifications. Unit Beta crossing secondary corridor. Movement efficiency, high. My hands were not entirely steady. I noted this and then continued noting it, because I was an observer and noting things was what I was here to do. At approximately 2,140 hours, the Eastern unit encountered heavier resistance than the pre-engagement projections had estimated. I watched from the ridge as the formation adapted, not on command, not after a coordination signal, but as a collective responding to new information the way a single body responds to a change in terrain. Individual humans making individual decisions that fit together into something my species would have needed a committee and 3 days of discussion to produce. My data tablet was recording all of it. Every movement, every coordination, every tactical shift. The timestamp was running. I am telling you now that I was not fully present for approximately 4 minutes of that recording. I was there physically. My lenses were pointed in the right direction. The tablet was capturing data correctly. But I was watching something that 4,000 pages had not prepared me for, and my processing systems were running behind what my eyes were taking in, and somewhere in that gap I stopped being an observer and became something I do not have a precise word for. A witness, maybe. Something that is less clinical than observer but more deliberate than bystander. Then I saw Owen. I identified him by the marking on the left shoulder of his jacket that I had catalogued during our conversation that morning. He was in the forward unit, with Cole, in the part of the situation that the pre-engagement briefing had described as requiring the highest individual risk tolerance. He was moving. Steady and deliberate, carrying the same quality he had sitting outside the supply building with a photograph of a 4-year-old who laughed like her mother. I tracked him on the lenses for approximately 90 seconds. Then I did what I was supposed to do and moved my observation focus to the wider tactical picture, because I was not supposed to be tracking individual soldiers. I was supposed to be documenting collective behavioral patterns. I moved the focus. I moved it back. He was still moving. Still steady. Then something happened that I will attempt to describe accurately, understanding that accuracy and adequacy are not the same thing. A soldier at the left edge of the forward unit, a male I had catalogued but not spoken to, went down. He went down suddenly and completely, the way objects go down when they stop being supported, and 3 of the humans nearest him changed direction. Not on command. No visible signal. No vocal coordination. They simply turned, all 3 within the same half-second, and ran back toward the one who had gone down. They ran back through the thing they had just run through. I stood up. I did not mean to stand up. Standing up was not in the observation protocol. Standing up served no tactical or documentary function. I simply stood, the way you stand when something you are watching requires your full height to receive it properly. The 3 humans reached the one who had gone down. 2 of them provided direct support. The 3rd established a covering position. They moved as a coordinated unit, back through a corridor that made their efficiency extraordinary in a way that the word extraordinary completely fails to capture. My data tablet slipped from my hands. It hit the ridge surface below the observation shelter and I heard it land and I did not move to pick it up for a very long time. I was standing on a cold ridge looking at something I did not have a file category for. It was not the tactics. Human units recovering incapacitated personnel under fire was a catalogued behavior, referenced in the briefing packet with a statistical prevalence rate and a note about training protocols. I had read that section. I had processed it as information. What I had failed to process was what it meant. Because the 3 humans who turned back were not following a rule. They were not calculating survival probability and determining that the recovery was tactically optimal. It was not, and anyone who ran that calculation would know it wasn't. They turned back because the one who went down was one of theirs, and that fact was a decision they had made long before tonight, so long before tonight that they did not experience it as a decision at all. They turned because some things matter more than the calculation. I had known this intellectually. The subappendix had probably said something about it. The briefing packet had charts and statistical breakdowns. Standing on the ridge watching it happen in real time, I understood that I had not known it at all. I had known a description of it. Those are completely different things. The situation below continued for another 90 minutes. I know this from the tablet's recording, which ran without me properly attending to it. I was there. My lenses were pointed correctly. I was breathing. I was watching. At some point it was over. The specific quality of sound that had arrived before 2100 reversed itself, the way a tide goes out, not suddenly but completely, until the world was just wind and the distant noise of human organization beginning to reassert itself over the aftermath. I stepped down from the observation shelter. My tablet was in the mud below the ridge, face down, its screen cracked in a diagonal line across the lower third. I picked it up. Looked at the cracked screen. The recording was intact. The field log was intact. The crack ran directly through my last typed entry, the one that said I am aware this report will be insufficient. I stared at that cracked sentence for a long time. Mara found me standing there 20 minutes later. She did not ask if I was all right. Humans only ask that when they have already assessed the answer and found it unsatisfying. She came and stood next to me and looked at the same general direction I was looking, and after a moment she sat down on a section of stone outcropping. It seemed like a thing I was supposed to do as well, so I sat down next to her in the mud. We sat there. First time seeing a real one, she said. I thought about my predecessor's note. I thought about what I had told her at the transport ramp. Yes, I said. She nodded. Looked out at the dark. It doesn't get easier, she said. But you learn to carry it differently. It becomes part of your weight instead of the thing that drops on you. I did not know what that meant yet. I was beginning to know, in the small and preliminary way that knowing begins. Cole's team recovered everyone, she said. All of them. She said it simply. The way you state a fact that matters more than its brevity implies. I looked down at the cracked data tablet in my hands. Yes, I said. I saw. The base looked different in daylight, and not just because of the light. Places change their character when the people in them have been through something together. The air was the same iron and stone smell. The buildings were the same functional construction. But the humans moved differently, slowly in some places, with concentrated purpose in others, and in a few corners of the compound, completely still. 3 people stood without speaking in the open area between the fuel storage and the eastern building. Not talking. Just standing near each other. There is a specific human posture for grief that the behavioral packet had described clinically and that I now understood was one of those descriptions that achieves accuracy and misses the point at the same time. I went to the common building to get coffee and write up my preliminary field notes from the ridge. The recording on my cracked tablet was intact and detailed and chronologically organized, which meant the official report section on the engagement itself would be technically complete. This was professionally good. I sat down with my coffee and my tablet and stared at the field log. I had 600 time-stamped data points. I opened the field log. I typed for approximately 2 minutes. Then I stopped and read what I had typed. It was accurate. It was also about as adequate as a structural diagram of a building is to the experience of living in one. I closed the field log and opened a document I had started 2 nights ago, the one I had not labeled, the one that was not an official report, the one I was writing for reasons I had not yet fully classified. I sat there with it open and wrote nothing for 15 minutes. Then Lena walked in. She was carrying 2 cups of coffee and she set one down in front of me without asking, which was either excellent observational instinct or a deeply ingrained human habit of providing for people who look like they have been sitting somewhere difficult. She sat across from me and wrapped both hands around her own cup and looked out the window toward the ridge. Hell of a night, she said. Yes, I said. She nodded. Drank her coffee. did not seem to require anything further from me, which I found unexpectedly comfortable. Finn's guitar got left on the ridge, she said after a moment. He's furious about it. Which means he's all right, because when he's not all right he doesn't talk about guitars. I thought about that. The music he was playing yesterday afternoon, I said. Before the engagement. What was it? No idea, she said. He never names them. Just plays whatever comes. Says the naming would make it into a thing instead of just a thing he does. She shrugged, the way humans do when something makes complete sense to them despite being impossible to explain. I went back to the document I wasn't writing. She stayed with her coffee. Neither of us said anything for a while, and that was fine. The naming ritual happened at 1,400 hours in the central compound. I had seen a description of it in the cultural supplementary appendix. 2 paragraphs about human military memorial practices, the function of collective verbal acknowledgement in grief processing, the cohesion value of shared ceremony, the psychological purpose of naming the specific individual rather than citing aggregate losses. I had read those 2 paragraphs and filed them correctly. I had not read anything that prepared me for standing 20 meters away and watching it happen. Cole stood at the front. He had a sheet of paper, physical paper, handwritten, and he read from it slowly. One name at a time. After each name there was a pause. Not a scheduled pause, not a protocol silence with a defined duration. An organic pause, the length that the gathered people needed to let the name settle into the space around them. Every person in that compound was there. Including me. I had not been summoned. I had simply walked toward it the way you walk toward a source of heat when you are cold. Mara was to my left. I did not know when she had arrived. Cole read 7 names. 7 pauses. On the 7th name, something happened in the space around me that I cannot accurately describe in the vocabulary I have available. The silence after the 7th name was different from the others. Heavier. Or more full. I am not sure those are different things. Cole folded the paper. Said something short. Said it once. Not loudly. The gathering did not disband so much as it redistributed, people moving toward each other in small clusters, or moving off alone, or staying exactly where they were and simply remaining. I stayed where I was. Owen found me there about 10 minutes later. He had the same quality of stillness he had carried outside the supply building, but waited differently now. He stopped beside me and we stood looking at the central compound without either of us needing to establish why. 7, I said. It was not something I had planned to say. 7, he said. We stood there. After a while he reached into his front jacket pocket and took out the photograph. He did not look at it directly. He held it at his side, and I understood that he was not looking at it but that having it in his hand was a different kind of looking. She'll be 5 in 3 months, he said. This was the same thing he had told me the morning before. I knew he knew that. He was not repeating information. He was doing something else with the words, anchoring himself in them. Using the future as something to stand on when the present was difficult to stand in. She'll be 5, I said back. He nodded. I read something, I said, in the cultural supplementary appendix. There is a reference to a human word, I cannot pronounce it correctly with my vocal anatomy, but the translation note describes it as the grief that confirms love was real. Because ordinary loss is just absence. But grief that aches is evidence. Of something that existed. Something that mattered enough to leave a mark when it was gone. Owen was quiet for a long moment. He looked at the photograph now. Really looked at it. I didn't know that was written down anywhere, he said. I am not sure it should need to be, I said. He put the photograph back. Looked up at the ridge, which was visible from where we were standing, catching the afternoon light in a color that the iron and stone smell of this planet somehow made feel fitting. You filed your report yet, he said. A preliminary version, I said. The full submission is due 48 hours after I return. Is it accurate? I thought about the cracked data tablet. The 600 time-stamped data points. The entry that said this report will be insufficient. The data is accurate, I said. I am not certain the report is. He nodded. The specific nod of someone who understands exactly what you mean. Yeah, he said. Some things are like that. He stayed for a few more minutes, and then he went to find Pete, who was sitting on the fuel storage crate eating something from a container and looking completely ordinary, the way humans look completely ordinary after extraordinary things because the ordinary things still need doing and humans understand that. I went back to the unlabeled document. I sat in the common building while the light outside moved through the afternoon and I wrote for a long time. Not field notes. Not behavioral analysis. Something between those two things, in the space those two categories share but neither one names. I wrote, they made the calculation once, long ago, and they have been living inside the answer ever since. The calculation was not, what is survivable? The calculation was, what matters enough? I wrote, they carry their dead in a tense that is neither past nor present. The names exist in a permanent now. Cole read them today and they will always have been read today. I wrote, Mara said it becomes part of your weight instead of a thing that drops on you. I think this is the truest thing I have heard on this planet. I wrote, I deleted Owen's photograph from my field notes. I would like to say I deleted it to protect his privacy. I think I deleted it because some data should not be filed. Some things belong to the person who is carrying them. I stopped there. I looked at what I had written. It was the most honest document I had produced in 11 years of diplomatic observation work. It would never be submitted to anyone. It existed only because I had written it, and whatever that made it, it felt like the kind of thing that needed to exist. I saved it. Did not label it. Closed the tablet. Outside, the singing had started again. Finn had apparently located his guitar. I sat there and listened to it until it was dark. I left the base at 0700 the following morning. Mara drove me to the transport dock in a vehicle that rattled over uneven terrain with the cheerful disregard of something that had survived worse. She drove the way she did everything, competently and without ceremony. The base shrank in the side viewport and then disappeared behind the ridge, and I was looking at open terrain again and the sky here, which was a particular shade of gray-green at dawn that I had not seen on any planet in my prior postings. I had my supply pack. My data tablets, the cracked one and the secondary one with the unlabeled document, both of them. The briefing packet, which I had stopped consulting sometime during day 2 when it stopped telling me things I needed to know about what I was seeing. Everything in my pack except a clear and portable way to describe what I was taking home. Mara pulled up at the transport dock and climbed out alongside me, which I had not expected, since dock drop-offs are functionally complete the moment the passenger exits the vehicle. She stood by the transport ramp with her hands in her jacket pockets and looked at me with the same evaluating quality she had used every time before. Well, she said. You kept up. I was not entirely sure that was true, and I said so. She considered this. Keeping up doesn't mean keeping pace, she said. It means not looking away. She paused. You didn't look away. I thought about standing up on the ridge when I was supposed to be sitting. I thought about the drop tablet. I dropped my data equipment, I said. Sure, she said. But you didn't look away. I did not have a response that felt adequately accurate. She extended her hand. Humans do this at departures, a brief physical connection that means something proportional to the context in which it occurs. After 3 days on that planet, I understood what this one meant. I took her hand. Good luck with the report, she said. Thank you, I said. She went back to the vehicle. I walked up the ramp. I sat in the transport for the 6-hour return journey and I opened the official field report template and worked on it with focused, methodical efficiency. I structured it correctly. I populated the required sections. I attached the 600 time-stamped data entries. I wrote the tactical summary, the behavioral pattern analysis, the casualty data in the appropriate format, the mission outcome assessment. I submitted it before we docked. It was the most technically complete report I had ever filed. It was also, I knew, a description of something that had happened rather than a document of what it had been. But that was what the template required, and the template was built to receive the kind of information it knew how to hold. The Accord, I had decided, was missing some categories. Home docking at the Valhari Administrative Hub took 40 minutes of transit procedures, documentation checks, and the specific institutional smell of a very large building in which nothing dramatic has ever occurred and no one intends for anything dramatic to ever occur. Clean recycled air. Smooth surfaces. Lighting calibrated for optimal bureaucratic productivity. My quarters were exactly as I had left them. Organized, orderly, 7 data tablets arranged by project on the desk shelf, my professional certifications on the wall, 11 years of observation logs archived in physical form in the cabinet by the window. Everything in its correct place. I stood in the doorway for a long moment. Then I walked in and sat on the edge of the desk and looked at my quarters from the inside, and they were familiar and correct and somehow subtly wrong in the way a room goes wrong when you have been sleeping on cold ground for 3 days and your body remembers the difference. The debrief was the following morning at 0900 hours. A senior Velhari observation officer named Gareth ran it. Gareth was everything the Velhari administrative system produces and values, meticulous, even-tempered, precise in his language, and so thoroughly at peace with his conflict-free existence that I found myself looking at him from a new angle that I could not entirely account for. He had a copy of my submitted report on his desk. He walked through the standard debrief questions in the standard order. Any technical difficulties affecting data collection? 1 calibration lens required adjustment. Tablet screen damaged during an equipment drop. Recording remained intact. Any communication issues with assigned human contacts? None. Any deviation from observer neutrality protocol? A pause here. Not a long one. The kind that would not register in a recording. No, I said. Any incidents requiring supplemental reporting? I thought about 7 names. I thought about Owen's photograph. I thought about 3 humans turning back. I thought about the word in the cultural appendix that described grief as evidence of love. No, I said. Gareth made his notations. Reviewed the tactical summary section of my report with his standard focused attention. Asked 2 follow-up questions about the engagement timeline. Noted that the casualty data was formatted correctly. Told me the report would be processed within the standard window. Good work, he said. Clean posting. Straightforward observation. Exactly what the protocol is designed for. Thank you, I said. You'll receive your next assignment in approximately 3 weeks, he said. Standard rotation gap. Take the time for proper rest. Yes, I said. I will. I went back to my quarters. I sat at my desk. I did not do the things I usually do after returning from a field posting, the equipment inventory, the supply repack, the preliminary scheduling review. I sat at my desk and looked at the wall where my observation logs were filed in chronological order, 11 years of clean, correct, technically complete reports in their physical binders. I thought about what my predecessor had done after filing his final report. I was beginning to understand it. I opened the secondary tablet. Found the unlabeled document. Read what I had written in the common building while Finn's guitar came through the walls and the afternoon light moved across the compound floor. Then I continued writing. I wrote for most of the afternoon. I did not time it. I was not producing content for any submission deadline or observational requirement. I was writing the way Finn played, not naming it, not turning it into a thing, just doing it because the thing needed doing and there was no other way to do it. I wrote about the briefing room. About the moment 40 people received a plan that might be the last plan they would ever need, and received it the way my colleagues receive a departmental memo. I wrote about Owen outside the supply building, still and quiet in the way humans go quiet when something is happening inside that doesn't fit in the available outer space. I wrote about Lena's laughter and how it existed in the same day as the sealed envelopes handed to the base coordinator, and how neither one was a contradiction of the other, and how my cultural frameworks had given me no way to understand a mind that can hold both of those things without one displacing the other. I wrote about the ridge. About standing up when I was supposed to be sitting. About the 3 humans who turned back. I wrote about the name reading and the 7 pauses and the way the 7th one was different and how I had no adequate vocabulary for why. I wrote, my species resolved our last war 8,000 years ago. We consider this the highest achievement of civilization. And it is. I am not arguing that it isn't. I stopped there for a long time. Then I continued. I wrote, but I think we learned to end the fighting. I am not certain we learned what they learned, which is something separate from the fighting itself. Something about what you are willing to carry. About the calculation they made, once, long ago, so completely that it is no longer a calculation but a quality, the way water is wet not because it decided to be but because that is what it is. I wrote, they decided, at some point before recorded history or in the first chapter of it, that some things matter enough to stand in front of. And then they built a world that is also full of guitars and coffee and photographs and children who laugh like their mothers. They did not resolve the tension between those two things. They live inside both of them, fully, at the same time. I wrote, I think this is what my predecessor saw. I think this is why he did not come back to this desk. I saved the document. Still did not label it. Then I opened a new document, official template, correct header, proper accord submission format, and I wrote something I had not written in 11 years of diplomatic observation. I wrote a supplemental query. It was addressed to the Accord Research and Ethics Division, the only body I could identify as having even a theoretical interest in the kind of question I was asking. I formatted it correctly. I cited the appropriate field observation reference number. I wrote it in the precise, measured language the Accord uses and values. It said, this observer requests clarification on a point arising from field observation that is not addressed in current protocol documentation. At what point in a civilization's development does the absence of conflict indicate the presence of peace, as opposed to the absence of a willingness to decide that something matters enough to stand in front of? Is there an Accord precedent or relevant research addressing the distinction between civilizations that ended conflict because they became something better, and civilizations that ended it because they became something smaller? Requesting any relevant material. Will wait for a response. I read it back. Then I submitted it. I had no expectation that Gareth's office would know how to process it. I had no expectation that the Research and Ethics Division had a precedent file for this category of question. I had some suspicion that it would be routed to the administrative wellness system and that someone would send me a polite automated response and a calendar invitation for a consultation. I submitted it anyway. Because the question was real, and real questions deserve to be asked even when the system receiving them does not have the right filing categories. 3 weeks passed. I did my supply repack. I did my equipment inventory. I read. I walked the long corridor circuits of the administrative hub in the mornings, which Velhari do for contemplative purposes. I thought about Owen's daughter, who would now be closer to 5. I thought about Mara's hands in her jacket pockets at the transport ramp. I thought about the 7th pause. The Research and Ethics Division sent me a polite automated response and a calendar invitation for a wellness consultation. I went to the consultation. A Velhari wellness officer named Petra, kind and genuinely thoughtful, asked me careful questions about reintegration and professional stress response and whether the field posting had impacted my sense of alignment with my work. I answered honestly. We spoke for an hour. At the end she told me I was processing the experience appropriately and that it was common for observers returning from human postings to require some additional adjustment time. The previous observers all noted similar responses, she said. It is a high-intensity field environment. Different from our standard postings. Yes, I said. The key, she said, is to maintain perspective. What you observed is their nature. Their history. Their way of being. It is not our way, and that is all right. I sat with that for a moment. I know, I said. I am not certain our way is complete. She looked at me with a quality that was kind and also slightly concerned. I told her I was fine. I thanked her for her time. I left. The next assignment letter arrived on a morning when the administrative hub's recycled air was particularly clean and the lighting was particularly well calibrated and everything was exactly as it should be in a civilization that had resolved its last war 8,000 years ago. The envelope was from the Diplomatic Observation Corps. Official seal. Proper formatting. I opened it. The first word was congratulations. I sat with that word for a while. I turned it over. I thought about the last time I had read it. I thought about sitting on the transport before docking, filing a technically complete report that missed the point. I thought about Gareth telling me it was a clean posting. I thought about Mara at the transport ramp saying I had kept up. I put the letter down and I packed. I packed my data tablets, the crack screen one and the secondary one, both of them. I packed my calibration lenses. I packed the field manual, which I still believed in, with new handwritten notes filling the margins. I packed 1 dose of NerveCalm, not because I thought I would need it but because it was on the kit list and I respected kit lists. I left the remaining 5 doses on the shelf. I took my predecessor's note. The folded paper. I had read it many times and each time I understood it differently. I folded it back along its original lines and put it in the front pocket of my pack, not the bottom, not buried, but accessible. The place where you put things you want to be able to reach. I thought about writing something for the next observer. The one who would come after me someday, who would open their pack on the transport and find nothing there, because no one had thought to put something there for them. I got a sheet of paper. I wrote, "You are going to drop your data tablet. This is fine. Pick it up and keep going." I thought for a moment. I wrote, "They already made the important decision. Long ago. So long ago it feels like a fact about them rather than a choice. But it was a choice. Keep that in mind. It will help you understand everything else." I thought for another moment. I wrote, "The coffee is necessary. Have 2 cups." I folded the paper and left it in the desk drawer, marked with my posting designation number, in case it ever needed to be found. I picked up my pack. I walked to the transport bay. Through the bay viewport, the transport was already docked and the crew was running final checks, and in 6 hours I would be stepping off a ramp onto a planet that smelled like iron and old fire, and someone would be waiting with the evaluating eyes of a person who has seen things that leave permanent marks, and they would ask me a question I was now prepared to answer correctly. I stood at the transport ramp. I thought about the 7th name. The 7th pause. The one that was different from the others without being explained. I thought about Owen's daughter, who was 5 now, or almost 5, who laughed like her mother and whose laugh her father could not quite hear right in his memory anymore, only his memory of it, not the actual thing, and who was, on some planet somewhere, probably laughing at this exact moment at something just off the frame. I thought about Finn's guitar. I took 1 step onto the ramp. Then another. The transport sealed behind me and I sat in my seat and I opened the unlabeled document on my cracked screen tablet and I kept writing, because some things do not finish when the posting ends, and some reports take the rest of your life to complete, and that is not a failure of the report. That is the point of it.